So let's go ahead and get started with today's topic of resource management and utilization. The agenda for today will be focused on 4 main activities: approaches and best practices when considering resource management in OpenAir, ways to measure utilization, and although the word utilization is a very simple concept, it can get complicated pretty darn quickly, and OpenAir can support quite a few of those complications. We're also going to go into capacity and staffing needs, something that you probably had to deal with in your budget cycle at the end of last year, or maybe are struggling with right now to see how you're going to do your staff plan for the fiscal year. And just touch on profiles and skill searches, some suggestions or things to think about regarding these activities, these needs when it comes to reporting and lookups. So let's move into resource management approaches. There are basically 2 main models, and I'll get a question of, so, is it definitely one way or the other? No. There's the left side and the right side and a huge gray area in between. So the 2 main models are a centralized approach or a decentralized approach. Do you have a core focus team that does everything, or do you have an empowerment or push down of activities to lower level resources like department managers or project managers, or heck, even the consultants themselves? And those 2 main models sort of drive some of the decisions of feature functionality and process in the system. So what do I mean by centralized resource management? My definition of centralized resource management is you have a focused resource or team handling the scheduling of resources. They don't do project management. They're not responsible for hiring and firing. They don't have a P&L. They're really focused to make sure they know where people are and are they busy. Okay? And if they're not busy, maybe doing some proactive communication to department managers or project managers to say, hey, we've got these kind of skilled resources on the bench. Do you have anything for them? Okay? So because they're focused so much on this topic, and by no means is this a small function, but because they're so focused, they can actually control data at a more detailed level. You can actually get more detailed tracking and more process workflow differentiation, such as maybe not signed contracts or tentative resource scheduling versus requesting versus committed or firm, that kind of thing. So, that with a centralized team, because they're focused on that one aspect of the process, you can actually have more detailed tracking. The decentralized process is more of a push down, empowering people down doing more activities outside of resource management to do resource management. This is, in my view, definitely I'm not the ultimate purveyor of resource management procedures, but what I've seen worked effectively is this is more of a, I'm going to go and grab people based on the fact that I know they're open and available, so there's no middleman, so you can get more real-time response for resource scheduling. This type of approach tends to be require more monitoring and is more reactive because it does increase the probability of conflicts. Those high-demand resources, get grabbed by anyone, and unless they're being diligent and following the procedure, it could possibly mean that everyone's grabbing, John Smith, and John Smith suddenly has to work 65 hours in a single day, which until somebody figures out how to change the hours in a day, that's almost impossible, or is impossible. But, what are the gray lines in between centralized and decentralized, right? A centralized to say, okay, there is a middleman, there is a traffic manager, there is a person who is responsible that you have to talk to, and they are the ones that release and give you the resources. That's sort of a strict centralized view. A gray area of centralized versus decentralized is, okay, so you have regional structures and you have regional centralized managers, so there's still a centralized team, but now you have multiple of those that are focused on a specific area of the country. Decentralized, definitely down to the project manager level. Grab who you can, when you can. and then negotiate as conflicts come up when the department managers are monitoring resources to say that you need something else. Gray area there, project managers involved in project management but doing it more from a request response or modifying their own resource schedules once they've gotten approval to use things. So there's lots of gray in the centralized, decentralized, and it's really a matter of who is responsible for doing what in your company and what is the dynamics of your organization. And we'll talk about some things to think about in those areas. So if we go from a centralized best practices, here's things to consider in the centralized best practices. Because you have a person who is responsible for maintaining or managing availability of people and billability or perhaps booking or scheduling availability of people, what you're going to end up having to put in place is some process flow that deals with a request fulfillment model. Okay? OpenAir actually supports the request process in two different ways, and it really depends on what kind of notification structure you want to put in place and what kind of automation you want to take advantage of. One of those is the booking request. This is something that may or may not work for you. Booking request is very similar to a timesheet approval process or an expense report approval process where you do have somebody filling out the request, submitting it, it gets routed to someone for review and approval, and that is more of a request fulfillment approach. Okay, the advantages of using a booking request are the fact that as you're asking for someone, they're not showing up as taken or pending or in the queue or anything like that as far as the schedule is concerned, because you've just simply asked the question. There's no data reflecting in the system that that person is or is not available yet. The other best practice that I've seen happen more and more often in OpenAir is using just straight bookings. And by the way, when I mention things in these webinars, I am referring to the OpenAir standard terminology, so you may have renamed bookings to allocations or staffings or resourcings or whatever. Just try to do that mental terminology swap in your head if you could. So what I see more often is people doing straight bookings with a special booking type called request. And the advantage here is you actually can sort of grab or hold on to someone that you want or leverage more of a generic resource process. And it does get reflected that someone has asked for this person while that negotiation or that fulfillment is going on. So depending on how dynamic things are, maybe that is a better way for your organization to know that this person has been asked for when you're looking at resource charts and stuff like that in OpenAir. The booking request doesn't show you that someone's asked for it in any kind of chart form unless you run reports. Okay. The booking request, the booking with the request type does have the ability to actually configure your notifications. You may know that based on settings in the system, you can send notifications to the person who's being requested or the person's manager, for example. But the nice thing about the booking with request option is that what you may not know is that once you set those notifications up and you introduce booking types, on the booking types themselves, for example, you can control who will actually get notified. So you can be a little more robust on your notification workflow as far as saying, okay, well, while I'm negotiating someone, I don't want them to know that they've been asked for. Okay, so let's not trigger a notification. But on the other hand, when they have been committed or confirmed or hard booked, then I want them to get the email. Okay, you can actually tell the system based on those notifications that you only send the email when it's this booking type. Okay, and that's something you can configure down at the booking type level. Okay. Also, depending on the ownership of bookings in the system, you can limit who can make changes to those bookings based on the way the booking type is set. So you can say a project manager can request a booking, but they are allowed to make changes to that booking as long as it's in a request mode. But the minute it's confirmed or changed to something else, they are no longer permitted to make changes. That has to go through a request and fulfillment process. And that's where this restrict booking editing by role is possible. The key for success, though, with the centralized best practices is that timely response will ensure or make the adoption success higher. Okay? So because you're doing a request fulfillment, if there's a lag or a bottleneck in your centralized structure and your centralized data management, that will tend to drive people to work around your process, which of course is what you don't want to happen. So centralized best practice may end up being that gray area where you want a central team, but you figure out ways to avoid people going outside the system to get what they need done by ensuring that there's timely responses. Okay. So what are some best practices for decentralized resources or resource management? Okay. In a decentralized best practice, what I find works more successfully is an alignment to the project view. You're thinking in terms of projects and your project team, not so much resource ownership and resource busy or not busy views. Okay, so you're looking at your project and making sure that you have a project team and your resource plan. Okay. Because of the focus on project alignment, there's a feature inside the project itself that allows you to use what's called a booking grid. Some of you may have it called booking worksheet, depending on when you received your system from OpenAir. And that is a nice entryway to start resource management because it standardizes data entry. What do I mean by that? The booking grid configuration at the project level can only be in weekly or monthly or quarterly increments. Okay? Because of that, you are only allowed to enter information on a weekly level, a monthly level, and so forth. All right. It does make data entry quick and simple, but it does limit your level of detail. Okay. Because you're looking to see are people busy or not, maybe a week is granular enough. And you can go with a decentralized approach and people ask at a weekly level. Okay. Booking types don't really work very well in this type of model, in this type of feature because it does apply it to the entire grid, so you don't really have that mix-match capability. But something that is little known is there's an advanced function on the booking grids that allow you to copy from one project to another. So now, looking at it this way, as project managers are creating projects and copying projects, they not only can copy the project tasks and the billing rules and everything that you've set up on your templates, they can actually go into the project booking grid and copy a standard resource plan from your templates. And so let's take a look at that because that's something I'm discovering a lot of people are not aware of in the system. So I'll just go into any of my projects. If my friends from SY Partners are on the phone, I'm going to be looking at our booking grid here. Okay. I use weekly or monthly to standardize how data is put into the system. Okay. Because for my information, I only need weekly or monthly, but I'm going to show you how you can actually make that a little more robust. But the special copy function I was talking about is actually it's advanced booking grid, project booking grid functionality. It is an option that you can turn on in your system. It is not an internal switch. It's in the project settings. And what you can see it allows you to do is you can actually do some modifications, mass modifications from within your project. So the example here would be deleting everything and starting from scratch. Okay, you don't have to go into the resources module or the bookings tab to do that. You can do it from here. The other one is copy bookings, and just pick the project that you want to copy from. So let me just copy from one of my templates, for example. Okay. And here you would probably want to put resource and hours, shifting dates forward to align with the date structure that you have on the project and in your booking grid. This allows you to actually set up a template with generics on your template projects to say your typical team would require a project manager, senior consultant, technical architect, and Q&A support, for example. Set those up. Those get copied over into the project manager's project. They can put the hours per week or month of who they need, save it. All those resources are created, or those resource bookings are created in the booking module. and then you can use the simple swap team substitution to change those resources. Okay? But what about just using the resource functionality? Yes, project managers certainly can go into the resources module. The thing I find with project managers using the resources module is project managers are not necessarily resource managers, right? They manage a project, and perhaps a dedicated team would justify them going into the resource module, but they're not resource focused, they're project focused. So how could you minimize that? Our weekly tip actually last week was about viewing the resources booking tab, for example, in the projects module. Stay in the projects module, and so that would be something I always recommend. But you can actually leverage the resource module functionality to enter your bookings and make things a little more granular. And that would be the resource grid, or for some of you it's called the resource worksheet, that's available inside the resources tab. I actually just used the resources module. And under bookings, you have a grid. Okay? This grid, when you first use the system, it defaults to what's called a classic view, and you may or may not have filters and some setup done on it. Okay? You do have the ability to sort of break information down into daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever you'd like, by a couple of simple setup options. In the settings form, you can look at the time period that you want, which is weekly or monthly. Okay? You can filter information as you desire, but the key here is consolidate bookings by day totals. This is a fancy way of saying I want to be able to see my booked hours at whatever granularity level that I look at in the grid, regardless of how I entered the data in the system. Previous to this feature, you had to actually set the grid up to the time period that matched exactly with the booking or the allocation in the system. So now that limitation is removed. The only caveat on all this is this feature only works in the dynamic grid. So I do have customers that will turn this on, swear it's not working, and it's just a matter of you have to make sure that you change your grid view to dynamic. So if it says dynamic down here in the tips area, click on it, and you'll probably get tons of data that you previously couldn't see. But the advantage of this is that now project managers can actually just look at this as more of a spreadsheet and make changes dynamically along the way, changing people, changing hours per week, and they're not limited to looking at things only in a weekly view or only in a monthly view. They have the ability to come in and say, okay, well, at a monthly level, I want to look at that same information, and it consolidates it. Okay? And as you make changes and save it, OpenAir will adjust all of the records accordingly. It does not have any negative impact on reports. The only thing that even got commented on in the OpenAir user group LinkedIn forum was when we talked about these options, you'll notice that there's some rounding that's a bit annoying. It takes the work schedule, divides it by hours per day or something to try to come up with a calculated value as it consolidates or splits things out by day, week, month, and so forth. So unfortunately, you do get the 5 decimal place rounding activity going on. If you can live with that, this does become a very, very nice feature to use. And like I said, on reports, you can control those decimals, so you don't see 5 decimal places of information on your reports. If you do have a decentralized best practice in place, what ends up happening is your project managers, the main benefit for them to do resource management is that they're leveraging resource management as their schedule. Okay, so I need someone at a certain time. That's driving the timeline of when I'm expecting certain activities to happen. So to avoid overloading PMs with administration, you may decide that, yes, they can assign people to tasks, but I don't really want to maintain the dates on tasks. I'm going to leverage my resource management process to identify the schedule of work. Okay. So great. I talked about 2 things. There's tons of questions probably out there, and one of the things you're probably asking is, well, how do I know which is the best for me? Okay. Well, that's just the beginning question that you have to ask yourself. Things that you have to consider. How do you have your organization structured? Don't try to enforce a process that cannot be supported by the way that the organization is structured. So you have to consider that first. Who owns the demand for the resources? Is it the project managers? Who owns the resources? Are they going to be responsible? Do they have a P&L? Do they have 2 or 3 jobs that they have to do? What kind of problems do you have today? Do you have high demand resources that are constantly overbooked while you have 3 or 4 people that are sitting around on the bench waiting for work? Okay, do you need that middleman to kind of even out or do some resource leveling? How are your PMs doing project management, and what is their methodology? Okay, how do they plan out the project? How do they do their resource planning, right? Don't think in terms of, I got to make sure my department is busy. You have to loop the project managers in, because one process you may put in place may negatively impact their ability to manage the project. And if there's a conflict, anything that's going to contribute to end revenue and margin is going to win, and that means probably the methodology will win. Who needs what information to make decisions in the system? Forecasting, staffing needs, and we'll talk about those. How dynamic are your projects? Are your projects one-day activities? Do you need a resource management activity then? If it's just one day, project managers are probably the best to do it. If you have 2.5-year projects, maybe central management is better, because you're wanting to kind of grab people for longer periods of time. Okay. So you can see, and I put the and more. I wasn't trying to get out of anything, but we have entire workshops on just this topic as our company, other company work with you guys. So, these are some basic questions to ask yourself as you get started, and you can see how very quickly things can get complicated as you try to put even just the simple resource management process in place. So, as you're figuring out resource management, another thing that goes hand in hand with resource management is utilization. And there's all kinds of utilization, and everyone's definition of utilization is different. So as I'm listening to best practices in the industry and what the standard values are in the industry, 75% is the standard, 80% is standard. Okay, it's great to hear those numbers, but you have absolutely no idea without the context of what goes into that equation, and that's the key on utilization is how do you define your equation? A company that achieves 95% utilization may actually be saying, I'm adjusting the available hours to take out any travel, any admin, any vacation, any public holiday, any expected meeting time or email time. So of that, every hour that's left should be billable in order for us to meet our revenue. And if the company does not hit 95 or 99, they're not going to hit their targets, okay? Which is the complete different definition of, okay, I'm paying everyone 40 hours a week salary. I only hope that at least 30 of those hours are billable. Oh, look, that's like a 75% target, okay? In the end, those values may actually be the same between those companies, 95 and 75, but the equation is very different. So there are a series of standard equations in OpenAir, but with custom calculation features, now you can shoot the moon as far as what kind of equations you can come up with. The equation, though, has a basic definition that you have to think about. What is your denominator, meaning what are the available hours that you measure against, and the numerator, which is the hours that actually have recorded or that are planned to be used against that availability target. So let's look at the denominator. What are some of the standard options in OpenAir? The standard options in OpenAir are actually on the OpenAir user summary account-wide report. Okay. As you open up that summary report form and scroll down to the bottom of the report, it's one of those forms that's a bit scary because it goes on for pages and pages and pages. Okay. So as I open up this form, once I get past some of the standard summary reports, now I get all of these definitions about denominators, and boy, look at that list. And that's just the beginning of the flexibility, right? But it's only in this report because it's a user-based report. Okay. So what are some values that you would consider in the forecasting values? So this is forecasting utilization. How much do I plan on people to be utilized in the system? Because you're planning, OpenAir provides two basic factors, work schedule and base work schedule. And if you're not familiar with those terms, they're attached to the definition of the calendar in the system that you assign to each person. The base work schedule is number of hours per day, days per week, weeks per year, period. So in the U.S., it's typically 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks, 20/80. You'll hear 20/80 a lot. Okay, that's base work schedule. The work schedule takes out anything that is an exception, such as recognized bank holidays, and depending on your configuration in the system, you may also have vacation requests making a schedule exception in people's calendars. Okay. But historic gives you a little bit more flexibility. Of course, it has the work schedule and base work schedule, but the historic, it will rely on actual time. So now you can actually configure the denominator a little bit differently, if you'd like, to subtract certain types of hours. I want all the hours that were available, I want to make sure I take out any time that was recorded against vacation or sick, for example. So as I'm doing historical utilization, I'm dynamically adjusting the denominator to remove any of that specific time in the system. And of course, you can use base schedule or work schedule in those situations. Another historical value is a specific types of timesheet hours. So I only want to include billable or non-billable time type activities in my available hours denominator, because I'm doing a percentage of billable versus non-billable breakdown, and I want the denominator to just have the time that was put on the timesheet. Okay? So those historical values, the historical equations in OpenAir are something that has the most options, because it has actual time to consider in the denominator. Okay, so work schedule, base work schedule, actual timesheet hours, and then subtracting certain types of hours from the base work schedule. Okay, and those are all standard. Another standard value that you can use, but you're computing it in order to use it in custom calculations. So it's sort of that middle road. It's a standard field to use in custom calculations. And that is leveraging the target utilization feature. Okay? The target utilization feature is something that you can set up on individual people. And what it does is it actually creates another series of standard fields available for you to use in OpenAir. What do I mean by that? Target utilization is a great way to identify what capacity is, or the definition of available hours. So if your available hours for people to work is something different than base work schedule and work schedule, you tend to start looking at target utilization to define, okay, so how many hours per week can I realistically expect people to work in the company? Okay. And when I say work in the company, I mean productive work, things that contribute to revenue, perhaps, okay, thus capacity. Okay? So when you turn this feature on, what it allows you to do is set a percentage, and that actually gets applied to the work schedule, creating two more fields that are available on reports, target hours and base target hours. Target hours simply takes your percentage, multiplies it by the work schedule to get you target hours. Same thing for base. Target percent times base work schedule gives you base target hours. Okay? The reason I say that they're standard reports, or standard fields, is that if you go back up to the available values and go into resources, you now see base target hours, base target utilization, and then of course target hours and target utilization. Okay? So that gives you another way to adjust that denominator. And once you do have these values, because they're standard, now you can use them in equations. Okay? There are still some folks out there that are using a fixed denominator, meaning I'm measuring everyone against a fixed 1,600 hour year. Okay? That works well for organizations that have sort of a standard calendar, standard work schedule, but they just plan on some percentage of the calendar not being available. They don't want to mix and match things with target utilization. It's just a fixed amount. Okay. So OpenAir can support this. One way to do it, of course, is with target utilization, but another way is actually to set up a fixed denominator. Okay. How do you do that? That's strictly in the feature called custom calculations. For those of you who are not familiar with custom calculations, we will be going into some detail on a reporting webinar about that in the future. But the custom calculations is something that's done in the administration area. And it allows you to actually create what's called a custom detailed field representing the hours in a month that are considered the availability, or the hours in a year. Okay? The limitation with this, however, I do have to caution you before you get all dreamy-eyed, is you have to actually define this constant to be a specific time period. Okay? So if you do use 1,600 hours in a year, great. This field only represents the value of a year. I can't break that down automatically in OpenAir by month. It only understands it's a constant of 1,600. But I can create a monthly value that's about 134. Okay, and in this example on the screen slides, you can see that I have that in there. Oh. Now once you have that in the equation, that's your denominator, and now you can use that in custom calculations to come up with your utilization equation. So now let's talk about the numerator. We've got the available hours figured out, so let's talk about the numerator and how we deal with calculating that percentage. What are we trying to get out of the system? Okay. So there are some standard values in the system, standard percentage utilization values in the system, and those are centered around the way that you do resource management, bookings or assignments. Now you'll notice that I did not talk about assignments in the approaches at the beginning of this discussion. I find many limitations in assigned hours and task management that project managers tend to forget about, or they don't maintain the data accurately, or it's not able to be detailed enough to be useful. So I do advocate bookings over assignments in almost all cases. Yes, there are cases where assignments work better, but the majority of situations I find work better with bookings in the system. So there's booked hours and assigned hours, and the booked hours with actuals and assigned hours with actuals. I put a little star next to that just so you're aware that the concept of booked hours with actuals means that any time on a timesheet replaces the booked value for that same day. Okay? There is a slight limitation that we discussed in the last webinar, which was about forecasting, about how to make sure that the time entry, if it's 0, still replaces the booking. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that. It's a little bit of a lengthy topic, so I don't want to get into it again on this one. And also there's, you may see values called weighted booked hours. Give me the weighted booked hours. That's actually linked directly to a feature on the projects called pricing. I do have a few customers that use that feature, but not too many people use it in the terms of this weighted booked hours approach. So just so that you understand what the definition of that is. The historical standard values, so those are for forecasting, right? Bookings and assignments, looking forward, what am I going to need in the system, okay? For historical utilization, you're just looking at time on timesheets, okay? And the denominator, of course, is whatever you've figured out based on the standard options. In all of these cases, the numerator in all of these standard values in OpenAir are controlled by the filters on the report. That means that down there, when you include certain people or certain task types or certain time types or certain projects, those are the hours that are going to get pulled in the numerator. Those are what are going to contribute to the equation. Okay, pretty straightforward there. But lo and behold, you can do custom calculations, and this has opened a whole other world of calculations in the system that give you all kinds of columns of information you can put in, and there's quite a few capabilities in this area. Okay, so custom calculations. For a custom calculation, you have to define what the numerator is. Okay, fine. So it's timesheet data, but it's timesheet data for billable hours only. Okay, however you track billable hours with time type, with task type, with project stages, whatever. Okay, so you actually can create your own billable utilization equation by saying it's timesheet hours divided by my denominator, and then have that custom equation filter on timesheet hours that are only related to that billable activity. Okay? So because of that, now you've actually defined a new field, a new value that gives you utilization, and you can include that on reports as well. So here's an example of using my little base hours. I only measure against 134 hours a month. It's standard across everyone. I took a look at, okay, here's all the timesheet hours I have against people that I want to measure my percentage against. So you can see the timesheet hours divided by my available base month gives me my monthly utilization, and that's in the utilization equation I defined. Okay? And it actually was defined on this previous slide. Okay, so I'm trying to take you through it. And on top of that, since this rolls up to a total value, I can actually display this on a graph if you're using the graphical dashboard feature. The one tip I have to give everyone, and this is probably not something I need to say, but as you set up custom calculations, verify that it's calculating the way you think it should be, or it's pulling in the right values, or not pulling in the wrong values. And so I like to do that by basically inserting the computed field, but also by adding in all the components that made up that field. So I can just redo the calculation in my head and make sure that the numbers look like they're reasonable. Okay? So that brings me to capacity and staffing needs. So great, I just got done talking about utilization and how I can figure out how to measure the numerator and the denominator and customize things and identify available hours. And you know what? All of that same thing applies to the term capacity. Okay? Capacity is hours and revenue capacity is what I'm talking about here. How do I figure out the hours? Well, I have to figure out how many hours can people be productive that will convert to revenue. Okay, so you have to you as a company need to figure out what is the definition of revenue hours. Right? That could be standard schedule hours that are available from OpenAir. It could be the target utilization driving an adjustment that tells you what your capacity is. Okay? Then you have to figure out not only the hours, but who the people are. Right? In your capacity planning, you probably want to include employees, specifically employees, and employees that are billable. Many of you use OpenAir for invoicing and resource management, and those resources may not be billable resources. You don't want them to factor in capacity. They are not billable people. Okay? If you do not currently track this in OpenAir, I do recommend it to add a custom field on the user record to identify whether this is an employee or a subcontractor. Some of you handle that by job code or by department, for example. Those are all viable options. But you do need something to identify an employee versus a subcontractor when you're considering capacity. And then finally, the bill rate. Now, there are two main ways that I like to talk about with the bill rate. One is maybe you're setting up a constant by job code. So you're setting up a series of custom calculations that you have. The average bill rate for my senior technical architects is $225 an hour. My average bill rate for my technical writers is $75 an hour or something like that. And you set those up and you then have to define a series of custom calculations using those constants. The other option that does come with a beware statement is using the hourly rate field on the user record. Okay? The hourly rate field sometimes is mistaken for a cost rate, but it's actually the field that's on the demographic form called hourly rate. And you can actually enter the standard value there per person so that you can run reports multiplying by this hourly rate into custom calculations. Okay? My beware statement is if you do set this rate, it will get picked up as the default billing rate if you do not set billing rates for all resources on your time billing rules. So just be aware of that. For those of you who worked with us before, we like to make sure that this value is usually 0 because it's easy to find missing people from time billing rules. But the hourly rate field is your default bill rate. So here's an example of something I just whipped up prior to the webinar to say, okay, well, I did set an hourly rate on resources, and I adjusted people's availability with target utilization. So I said for each of these resources, I have 4 resources in this example, this is how many hours I can get for the year. okay? And I actually wrote a report behind the scenes that it gives me information month by month. But the information, when I run the report, I only care about total value. And as you can see, it just does the multiplication, gives me my total, and this is the capacity of what I can get for each resource, or each group of resources, or each department, for example, by default values, right? The hourly rate, target hours, and then the capacity revenue. I then can, in turn, throw that on a chart. Because I wrote the report to run monthly, it's going to compute each month, based on my target utilization values, what I expect each person to produce. That then, in turn, gives me revenue, and now I can map throughout the year what I expect my revenue to be. Okay? And this is how much I would gather in each month. Okay? I could change this report to be an inception to date, and I could actually map it against my revenue plan for the year. Okay? Now, as you're doing your capacity and staffing needs, that brings you to but I need to know people by skill set. I need to find out where I am with skill set as far as profiles is concerned. All right? And OpenAir has a nice skill database that basically allows you to track information and do searches on it using OpenAir standard functionality for searches. Okay? However, if you try to run reports that give me all the resources that have this certain skill set and their availability, okay, you will run into problems trying to run that report or write that report in OpenAir. Right? I would like to recommend or have you consider that if there are any key factors, key types of people, key skill sets that drive business, a lot of business in your company, like Unix programmers or master engineers, technical architects, SOE, value-added programmers, anything like that, you may want to consider having that be a custom field on the user demographic record. Now, before you shoot the idea down, think in terms of reports. We are, as a company, very big on helping people understand what reports can and can't do in OpenAir. And sometimes you may have to add additional fields that seem redundant or not as very efficient, but boy, once you set them, those reports fly like the wind. Okay? So think in terms of what's key and what do I have to report on a regular basis. And maybe those should be custom fields and not part of the skill profile. Okay? So to make sure I have enough time for questions from folks that have joined the call, I just want to summarize, we covered quite a few topics at a very high level in this presentation. And the one driver in a lot of this is, how is your company organized and what are your resource management needs to determine the best approach? Consider the way that your PMs are managing projects. Consider the types of contracts or the length of projects that you get. Consider your ownership and your organization reporting structure. Okay? Don't give up on utilization equations in OpenAir. We try to help people not fall back on that spreadsheet functionality as much as we can. OpenAir can do a lot. Okay, as I showed you, with custom calculations and even standard values, there's a lot to choose out there. So, so definitely go back through those slides or listen to the webinar again and see what you can come up with for your company. If you didn't think about it before, think about it now, because capacity planning is realistic in OpenAir. You have people, you know what they're supposed to work, and you know ideally what your average bill rate is, or maybe your bill rate by job code. All the values are there. You just have to put them together and have OpenAir calculate the results for you. Okay. And finally, because some of your staff planning and your capacity planning are interrelated to skills, you may want to identify skills that are something that you want to be able to report on, group people by skill set, and understand the utilization or capacity by those skill sets, which means maybe changing the way that you've structured your organization a bit. Okay? For those of you who don't know us, we are Top Step Consulting. We are continuing this expert series of webinars over the next few months. You could definitely visit us at our website, see the past ones that have been recorded, and please consider us. Hopefully these webinars have been very productive because we do look to make your business more efficient and make your whole organization more productive. So I'd like to open